Okay, welcome back. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Sophie Goltz. She lives and works in Berlin and Hamburg as a curator, author, and in art education. In 2013, she was appointed curator of the city of Hamburg, and I think this is the first and only city who has a city curator. I think we will hear about that later on. Since 2013, she has been head of communication and art information at the Neuer Berliner Kunstverein, curatorial and art information activities for various events, including Documenta 11, Documenta 12, DRESDENPostplatz, Berlin Biennale, the Projekt Migration, which was taking place in Zurich and Cologne, Wildes Kapital in Dresden, Notes on Archives 1 and 2 in Vienna, Gruppenbild Berlin, 1+1 Berlin, Conversation Pieces, again Berlin, and Remembering the Future in Jerusalem, and Lulennial in Mexico City. She also teaches at the Hochschule der bildenden Künste Hamburg and contributes regularly to Art Agenda, Sprin and Texte zur Kunst. So please welcome Sophie Goltz. Thank you.
First, I would also like to welcome you and also say thank you to Anton Falkeis and its team for the invitation and organization of this event. And I think my task might be a rather difficult, or not difficult, not so easy, as we heard about the complex layers of our futures and the complexity of art and its meaning. So my task now is to speak from a curatorial perspective, which is maybe inspired by the question our future raises to us, but also about the complexity of art, and bring this into a curatorial position which, to a certain extent in Hamburg, needs to be localized and not just raising global questions. So it refers to a very concrete urban situation of the city of Hamburg, and also with that, not only to the complex histories of the city of Hamburg, but also to the program of art and public space in Hamburg. So the project Stadtkuratorin was initiated by the city of Hamburg in 2013, and when I started to work as the so-called city curator, we decided to split the program into 3 areas. So kind of to also create a complexity within the program and how we can think of art and public space today. We called the program, as we've defined 3 areas, which is activating, which mostly refers to the history, curating, which kind of creates, or which invites artists to produce new projects with us in Hamburg, and educating. We called the program, We Are Not Ducks on a Pond, We Are Ships at Sea. And this is a title of a work which was by Lorenz Wiener, realized in 1989 as part of the Project Hamburg 1998 FF, and it was one of the most successful exhibitions in the program, because by the time it focused on ephemerical practices in urban space and invited artists to produce for months actually works in the city of Hamburg, mostly conceptual artists from the US and the Northern Hemisphere. So in reference to this project, we chose this title, but also in a way a little bit it speaks about Hamburg. And when I talk to localize, that means also, I think in a way in a European city, to provincialize maybe the question of public space, as it is quite a European concept, and it is a concept of exclusion and inclusion, and not only of humans, but also of other beings or objects and things. So when the introduction was kind of questioning of asking for migration. So we think it's not about really, it's not a topic for us. For us, it's more the question of how migration kind of changed the city, and not only since we see all these refugees, but also the post-war city, such as Hamburg, since 1945. So what actually how can we understand the city through the perspective of migration? So this is that's what is an outcome of art in public space, drawings for models to be realized. This is an edition of, we did together with Lorenz Wiener for the project. And how did we start the whole thing? So for me, I haven't lived in Hamburg, I know Hamburg, but how do you start to rethink art in public space? And this is the main task we have. We started with a symposium, Europe, the City is Burning, in a way to question, on the one hand, what has happened in the program, but what are the questions today, and how can we confront the history with the present? So we invited curators and artists who were involved in the program to discuss, on the one hand, their concepts by the time where projects has been realized in Hamburg and what they are today. So here, for example, Ute Bauer, which actually curated the program 1989 FF, and Lorenz Wiener, I mean, he's one, I guess, of the one of the most known artists who works in public space, and until today, he has been realized more than 1,000 works. Then, and as this might be a specific question for Germany after 1990, after the reunification, the question, how do we commemorate in public space? As this became part of the national narrative, especially the commemoration of World War II and the Holocaust. So here we have Esther Schalev-Gerz, and I will talk later about her project, and Susanna Milewska talking about commemorative politics today. We invited Mark Dian, especially to talk about the relevance of socially engaged art today. And of course, we invited curators who took part in the program and how they imagine the future of the art and public space and program in Hamburg. So, talking about this, in 2015 we started with an exhibition, and there's not enough time to explain the whole exhibition, but what we actually did, we researched all the protocols, files and projects of 35 years of history, and we defined 4 realms in the program. And the first one was die soziale Plastik, the social sculpture by Beuys, because Beuys was the first, let's say, internationally well-known artist who was invited to the program. And when the program was founded in 1981, it was quite a step ahead, so to say, of social democratic cultural politics. Because until then, art in public space was defined over art and architecture. So by kind of splitting art in public space, or call the program art in public space even, the program wanted to focus on artistic practices which are kind of going into the urban space, kind of confronting people with art in public space, so kind of getting out of the institution, following, let's say, the post-68 idea of art and culture, but also kind of they focused on practices with participation, on practices in education. So it was really much about kind of bringing art into the public, and not so much relating it to any new building which was built, and then you would kind of create a sculpture in front of the building. So Beuys was actually invited for a program which was called Nature, Sculpture and City, and he suggested, and what we actually did, and I might explain this in a minute, is we kind of researched and kind of what was the focus by the time, and what are the questions we have today. And what I will do is I will introduce 2 realms of the diagram and explain all the projects, but then projects we initiated where we might find an answer or a question we have today. So for example, when we have the soziale Plastik, the question we wanted to raise today is, on the one hand, how do artists engage socially today? So what does it mean? We have a whole set in the 90s of socially engaged art practices, which we now call socially failed art maybe. But this can be discussed, but we kind of have a new, for example, focus in art, which very much, especially here in Europe, works with refugees, or the question, how can we work with the presence of refugees in art? and how artists kind of create organizations where they, rather than producing an artwork, kind of create organizations in terms that they share their cultural capital. And for us, I mean, in terms of renewing the program, that means also kind of define how a cultural politics could react on certain developments we are seeing today in arts, but not only, but also in public space. So the second part is the part of remembering and forgetting, as this kind of is a very important part in Germany, as I said, the question of how to commemorate World War II, but what we see now is that Germany starts to begin also confronting itself with its colonial history. The city of Hamburg is the first city in Germany who officially said by the Senate that they want to research their colonial past and what that would mean for, let's say, a transnationalization of memory, but also that we not only having the commemoration of World War II, but also of colonial history, which until today not happened. We have the classical art and public space realm, which is the red one, where we have, of course, it's about urban perception, it is about art and education, it is about separated publicness, it is about commissioning. And what we see in the program, or what we analyze, is that the program mainly focused on male artists from the so-called NATO line. So you won't find much female artists, and you won't find much after '89, and you could say that would be the moment to maybe open up a little bit Eastern European artists or artists from other parts of the world. So in a way they got stuck with their idea of Western art. So that's where we are today, and the last one is in the 90s, the program itself changed under a new director, and it kind of focused on urban communication, and of course the question of relational aesthetics. So it very much was triggered by the idea to involve artists in urban development. So in 1993 they started a project called Weitergehen, and I will talk also about a bit later where one of the most famous projects came out of it, Park Fiction, today called Gezi Park Fiction, which was actually exhibited at Documenta 11 in Kassel in 2002, for those who were there. And today we have, the questions changed slightly, so participation became very much a neoliberal tool of governments. So there is no city development project in Hamburg where you wouldn't do a survey of citizens to ask them what they want, but they never would gain any control about their ideas, but of course they have been asked. So it's the same like with Olympia now. There's a referendum in November, and of course you can tell people have been asked if they want to have Olympia, but of course they don't have any impact on the actual developments. On the other hand, we see what the Occupy movement meant also for cities, and how, let's say, the question for democratic participation kind of went into the streets, and what that kind of also for a powerful element it is. But what does it mean if we see artists being involved in social movements for art and public space discourse? Because this is rather something I would say you curate. This is something artists claim or reclaim for themselves, and especially Hamburg has a quite strong tradition in the right to the city movement since the 2000 years, especially because of gentrification and kind of an inner city which became absolutely unaffordable. So many projects came out of that, and that's kind of where many artists are involved until today. And this is something also where the program, and you can see this, had no answer in the 2000 years. So they never really had an idea of how you maybe engage other artists in these kind of questions. So it kind of separated itself also from the program. That's where we are today, 2015, so we have a lot of social injustice. We have the question of globality within a local context and how to answer this. And I'm gonna quickly tell what was the plan of Beuys. So Beuys was invited, and he wanted to do the Gesamtkunstwerk Freie und Hansestadt Hamburg. And he suggested so by the time there was the expansion of the harbor, and he wanted to take the slit in Finkenwerder, so the fields with this kind of slit, and he wanted to detox the fields. So actually, from the series, Das Ende des 20. Jahrhunderts, he wanted to put one of the columns on the field, and then in the city he wanted to found an office for social change. And he wanted to invite experts, scientific people, artists, inhabitants, to kind of discuss how an environmental change of the city could happen. The project failed, and I'll make it short now. The project failed. In person, the mayor of Hamburg kind of cancelled the project. It was too dangerous for the harbor industry. So nobody really wanted to kind of develop any dust. What we did is, in the summer of 2014, we invited the artist Ahmet Öküt and initiated one of the silent universities in Hamburg as a project where refugees with an academic background teach other refugees and create public events. So it was a time when we didn't have Merkel saying you are all welcome, where we actually wanted to question what it means if we take the advent of refugees in society serious by actually how knowledge can be changed. We're doing this until today, and I just would have a film and I would give like a 3 minutes insight of what silent university is, maybe.
Universities for asylum seekers and refugees who have academic background and qualification back in their countries, and they travel to Western Europe or States or Western part of the world, and they are not recognized as academicians or as knowledge producers. And in case of asylum seekers especially, that they are not even recognized with their like very basic rights, and so this knowledge is not being activated for a very long time. And silent university is like an idea to jump over this waiting process and immediately activate those knowledge and give back the position. And 3 different types of institutions, that's the ideal goal of silent university: culture institutions and education oriented institutions and community focus organizations. And these 3 different kind of institutions collaborating together will bring a lot of opportunities and facilities, and we can give back the recognition to all the participants, and we can create this knowledge bank. I think we underestimate the potential of the art context. We totally misunderstand what is art. So we cannot use the real potential of an art space. To have a progressive art space is not so different than to have a progressive project that try to go beyond that description. That's a major problem. There are thousands of people like that, and we have to reduce that number of people, intellectuals, academicians, completely invisible in the society. And there are academies, huge buildings, huge companies, huge schools, huge universities. They really have to take time to think about that.
Stop here. So this is an example of an event we had with Ahmet Öküt in Hamburg, and one consultant, Ali Fatih, a refugee from Iran, who came in the 1970s to Germany, and Ismail Mosa, who came 2 years ago. And I'm gonna go to the chapter 2, Forgetting and Remembering, Commemoration Politics, and I will skip, or very briefly just say this is, because we are in Vienna, this is the counter memorial of Alfred Hrdlicka, a memorial he developed in 1985-96. Actually planned were 4 parts, realized have been 2 parts. The city kind of cancelled the past 2 because he overdue the budget. But that's like one of the most early one of the earliest examples of a memorial which kind of supposed to commemorate the victims of World War II. It's highly problematic as it kind of equalizes, on the one hand, it equalizes the victims of World War II and not differentiate. But I want to talk about this memorial from Jochen Gerz and Esther Schalef-Gerz in 1985. The city started a competition for an anti-fascist monument, and it became one of the most quoted monuments of the time because the proposal by Jochen Gerz and Esther Schalef-Gerz suggested to build a kind of 7-meter high column which disappears. So it wouldn't remain as a memorial, so it would, after 8 years, it would kind of only be left a plate in the floor. So because what they said is actually nothing can permanently rise up against injustice in our stead. So the proposal was that people could sign in a lit column their names and kind of demonstrate their will for anti-fascism. But what happened is actually it was kind of misused either by neo-Nazis or for advertising and other things. So in a way, the participatory aspect failed. But still, it became very much a symbol of maybe how we can think of memorials as not something which kind of stands forever in public space. Because this is one of the questions communities have, is what to do with all these objects of art in public space. I mean, how you have to take care of them, you have to deal with them, you have to sometimes clean them. So what do you do with this? And it's also a matter of money. So this is what remained until today. So you see the plate in the floor, and you have, of course, a sign which kind of shows the 7 steps. And I'm quickly. Until today, we still have kind of new memorials coming up in Germany, and this is something maybe also where I would say it conflicts with our ideas, because we don't really have an influence on that. But still, there was a competition in 2013 for a deserter memorial, and this is actually what you see is the proposal by Volker Lang, who won the competition, which is rather, I would say, an 80s proposal than a really contemporary proposal, because the question was. What you see here is the Kriegsklots, which is a memorial commemorating the fallen soldiers of World War I. It is a very nationalist memorial. It is very much about kind of propaganda, so to say, for war. And on the other hand, that's why they kind of created the counter-memorial of Redlichka. It was the question to kind of demolish it. But then, of course, it was a fight between the Social Democrats and the Christ Democrats, so they decided to keep it, but to build a counter-monument. And now you have like a sculpture park of 2 monuments, and the question actually was, in the competition, to combine them, to bring a 3rd monument, which is not only another 3rd monument, but also deals with the kind of complex situation of having these 2 memorials in a very narrow space. So this is the proposal which now has been in construction. So, and for us, this was the summer program. It was very much the question, thinking about commemoration as something which kind of really occurs in public space. How to make those spaces again to spaces of conflict. So how do we leave actually the homogeneous national narrative of how we commemorate public space? Or how do we create, and I use the German word, an Unbehagen and discomfort in the way how we think of our past. So we invited the Israeli artist Omer Krieger to work with us on a performance and intervention in the former concentration camp in Neuengamme. And in a way, we kind of questioned, we brought in different layers of the history of the concentration camp, but not in World War II, so after World War II, what happened there? So what, for example, happened, and this is the image below, is that in 1989 the concentration camp was occupied by Sinti and Roma, which were fighting for their right to stay. And it has been cleaned by the police, but at the end the Sinti and Roma became the right to stay in Hamburg. So what were actually conflicts in the concentration camp, and how can we also commemorate them today? So very quickly, so these are images from the performance, and the whole performative walk was accompanied by a African funeral band playing West African music. And another thing of a question of commemoration was an intervention by the Argentinian artistic group, etc., dealing with the history of the Chile House. At the same time, the Chile House became also part of the World Heritage because of its beautiful architecture. But for us, it was not so much about questioning the architecture, much more actually where the money came from. And it came from the exploitation of salpeter in Chile in the beginning of the 20th century, and the exploitation of Mapuche people. Another project we initiated together with the artist George Adiakpo, an artist who partly lives in Hamburg since more than 15 years, but is not that much known. In Germany, he became also known through Documenta 11, and he was actually the first artist from Africa whose work was bought for a German museum, for the Museum Ludwig in Cologne, after Documenta 11. And we initiated a series of one-day interventions in the city at places who are related to the colonial history of Hamburg. So, for example, this is the main institute of the University of Hamburg, and it's the former Colonial Institute. So this is just some impressions. And all these kind of one-day researches kind of accumulated in an installation this summer at Altonaer Balkon, dealing with the question and presence of colonial past in Hamburg. So now to the yellow line in the diagram, the chapter 4, Urbane Kommunikation, Urban Communication. As I said, Hamburg is very well known for its project Park Fiction. Park Fiction kind of answered the developments in St. Pauli. St. Pauli is one of the business improvement districts today in Hamburg. But by the time it was very much about the gentrification of St. Pauli, and they kind of claimed the park for themselves and started a so-called Wunschproduktion, production of wishes, to ask people of St. Pauli how they would imagine their park. So, started in 1993 under the directorship of Christoph Schäfer and Katie Skeen. 5 Minuten, okay. So, yeah, and it has been opened in 2003. So, and today I would say it is a place where people meet. It's a place where still a lot of things going on. As I said, it has renamed itself in Gezi Park Fiction because of the solidarity with the Gezi Park protests in Istanbul in 2013. So, I mean, it is a very social space in the city and very important. So as, for example, in 2012, when the city decided that the so-called Esso-Häuser should be demolished and have been sold to a private investor, a group of artists and inhabitants of St. Pauli started protesting against it. And I'll just give a brief example of an artwork, how it deals by Sylvie Kretschmer, the Megaphone Corps, who is an artist from Hamburg but now lives in Vienna. And they did interviews with people who were living in the Esso-Häuser and transformed this into a performance next to where the Esso-Häuser were standing.
Stoppen lässt sich natürlich nicht.
So what they do in the performance is they use quotes from the interviews. But from the protest, the Planbude emerged. The Planbude is, in a way, you could say, a follow-up project by also Park Fiction. And it's a project where the city government works together with people, with artists and inhabitants from St. Pauli and with the investors on a new model of, let's say, how to create new housing blocks instead of the Essohäuser. So what they actually did is they created the Planbude as a place where people could kind of create their own ideas. And then they were discussed with architects, and they started an architectural competition where now 3 architectural offices has been selected to actually now create a real proposal for the Essohäuser and people's demand. It's very short now, but maybe in the discussion. And so what was our question? Our question was how to deal with the city development. And for us, the Hafen City is kind of the Hafen City is one of the largest European city development projects. It's completely new, and we invited Martha Rosler and Miguel Robles-Duran, both from New York, to work with us on a kind of advertising campaign which actually questions the idea of those kind of regeneration cities. So they did a research on the Hafen City and the kind of economical bounds behind it, and compared this with other cities like Rotterdam, for example. And then those posters you see in the back were kind of placed all over the Hafen City. And interestingly enough, as they deal with the language of, how you say this, electoral campaign placards, so people were confused. If it's either a campaign for the Hafen City or against it, because when you read properly, you understand it's against it. But, for example, one poster says, the creative class lives here, where do you live? But people were not clear about what it actually means. So maybe I stop here. Thank you very much.